This is Dan Schneider, and in this Dan Schneider video interview, I will be talking with a man named Jeffrey Wattles, who has a website called anewphilosophyofliving.com, and we'll be talking about life, the cosmos, and everything in between, and that'll be in a moment. Well, in this interview, I wanted to just give a little brief introduction to Jeffrey. I had come across his website some months back when I was looking up different philosophers and different viewpoints on life or possible shows. His website is called anewphilosophyofliving.com. Jeffrey is an academic, but also a philosopher. Jeffrey, if you could just briefly describe what your website is, then we'll talk a bit about who you are, your career, your viewpoints on certain matters. So let's talk about your website, anewphilosophyofliving.com. Explain what it is, what your aims and goals are.
At the present time, Dan, it's basically just a place for my weblog. I try to post weekly, and I go through a range of topics. The philosophy of living is centered on, my philosophy of living is centered on truth, beauty, and goodness are the big topics. And under truth, I've got the truths of science, philosophy, and spiritual experience. And then under beauty, I've got beauties of nature and the arts. And under goodness, I've got morality and character. So those are my 7 categories, and the website is just focused on those. There are little pages up at the side that are basically undeveloped yet, and those will be added to in the months to come.
So let's talk about a little bit about your background. Are you a philosopher who is into religion, or do you have come from a theological background and philosophy? What did you study? And let's talk a little bit about where you came from and how you evolved to your opinions on matters.
Well, I had a religious upbringing, and I was very devout about that, but that faded gradually in high school. And then when I hit college, I dropped it like a hot potato, and my initial philosophy teachers kind of led me in a I would even say anti-religious direction in a certain way, at least a non-religious direction. But then I came back through transcendental meditation and my own personal experience, and in the middle of graduate school in philosophy, I found God again in a major way, and I became inspired at that time to start building my own philosophy of living from the ground up. And so my career, I'm retired almost 3 years now, but my career has been, centered on, well, truth, beauty, and goodness are topics under which all philosophy topics can be gathered. And I've taught a wide range of topics in philosophy and other disciplines as well along the way, and this is a nice way to integrate it.
So do you consider yourself then sort of non-denominational, or are you a Christian? And if so, what denomination?
Well, I think of myself as a religious philosopher, and in terms of, what I manifest with my classes and with my students and on the website, I don't identify with any denomination. I'm certainly a follower of Jesus, and that means so much to me. But the religious dimension of my website and my blogging and my this next new phase of my career in particular is focused on a cluster of core spiritual teachings that I find in the religion of Jesus, but I find them elsewhere as well. And so I find that Christians understand where I'm coming from very quickly, but I'm trying to present a message to folks that's it's not the traditional Christian message in some respects.
So, like for those people who are on more the left side of the spectrum, do you consider yourself a moderate? I mean, are you someone who would be like protesting at an anti-abortion clinic or condemning gay people, or you have a more open, inclusive philosophy?
Well, I'd go for the latter of those two categories, but my own philosophy as far as liberal, conservative, right, and left is that I try to listen sympathetically to people across the spectrum. And of course, I look for the best expressions, thoughtful, spiritually mature expressions of the issues, before us today. But my own belief is that one-sidedness sometimes gets it right, but a more, in my sense, philosophical orientation where you try to listen to people, understand what those stories are revealing about the values that they cherish, and those are generally real values. And oftentimes there are insights there that can be woven together. I try to harmonize if I can. I try to play peacemaker. It doesn't mean you can make peace with everything, but that's the emphasis that I have.
You mentioned transcendental meditation. But looking at you, you look like you're probably about in your 60s or so. Was this something that you discovered, like many people in the 1960s or 70s? And how did that alter your philosophy before that had come beforehand? And how did that presage later belief systems?
Well, I was looking for something, and my senior thesis was on Plato's Phaedo, and that's a pretty spiritual dialogue. And then my undergraduate philosophy mentor introduced me to yoga and that thought. And about that time, I was hearing about the Beatles going to Maharishi, and I thought, how cool it is that someone could go there and get, introduced to that. And then I was in graduate school in Northwestern and north of Chicago, and I heard, oh, transcendental, there's a lecture coming, and you can, pay 35. So I just went for it. It didn't that much affect my philosophy. I found myself pleased with the meditation experience, but unsettled about the philosophy. And finally, I made an experiment between the religion of prayer and worship and service as best I could and transcendental meditation, and I decided to go with the first and let the second go. It was a big story about that choice, but I've been happy with that ever since.
So, what did you find lacking in contemporary society when that set you on this path to come up with your own ideas of dealing with life? Whether it was it that most modern religions tend or have tended in the past to be more fundamentalist? Was it sort of the hedonism of modern society? What was lacking that made you seek out to try to, I guess, admix the best from certain other philosophies?
It wasn't anything in the society. It was a voracious personal quest. I have wanted to know how to live the human life. What does it mean to live a fully human life? And I had a strong spiritual component in me since early childhood. And even though that went underground for a while, the way a river sometimes goes underground, it just came up really strong. And, in graduate school, even before this kind of religious rediscovery happened, I just wanted to know truth. I had studied Plato, Hegel, Husserl. Those are my sort of favorite Western philosophers. And I just wanted more. And it was this drive for truth that led me on.
I see recently you wrote of submitting a manuscript called Living in Truth, Beauty, and Goodness, Values, and Virtues. It took you over a third of a century to write it, from what you state. So let's talk about some of those core philosophies. I think you mentioned a handful or more. What are some of those philosophies? And if you could just briefly explain what each of them are and how they relate to living a positive existence.
Okay, I'm going to introduce it with a real quick something here, and then I want to say truth has a spiritual core, a scientific periphery, and a philosophical bridge between them. And this kind of the core spiritual truths. All right, now remember, I'm 70 years old. I was growing up, I started in the first half of the 20th century when you could say the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man and not be taken as just an unreasonable, never got the message sexist. And that concept, and excuse me, the language that goes with it, is part of my being. So the idea that there's a creator in this universe, and that creator has revealed himself, if I can use that pronoun, as a loving father, not only through the life and teachings of Jesus, but elsewhere as well. And from that, I see, okay, if we're a family in this world, if you're my brother or sister, no matter what you believe, that kinship that we have has a source. To me, the idea of fatherhood implies that we all have, this is the universal fatherhood of God here, we all have that one personality source, however you call it. And I certainly don't want to beat anyone over with language here, make anyone feel miserable for this or that reason, because the deity is so many faceted and so on. But if you start with that idea and get the idea that we're all the sons and daughters of God, you've got two core truths, and that gets you on the way. Now look what comes next. If you say Father, we've got this cosmic source, we've got this awesome, beyond knowledge deity, but the word Father expresses personality, that means relationship, and there's a closeness there. So the closeness is that we can experience a relationship with God in our lives. And this, for the list I'm elaborating now, this will be truth number 3, that the Spirit of God is in every one of us. And we can all experience that starting today. Okay. And then going along with that, if you're a child of God, you can grow up to be like your parent. Well, finite human being is not ever, in my belief, going to become the infinite, eternal creator of all things. But there are ways in which we can become like God. We can express, and now here would be on this little telling, this would be truth number 4, let's call it. There's a love, and that love comes forth spontaneously. We experience it as, intakers, from our earliest experiences. Maybe at mother's breast, and hopefully in a nurturing family and friendships and so on in human life. But this desire to love and love more maturely and sincerely and with respect, and not just as a, oh, you turn me on, I want more of you kind of love, but as a love that wants to do good to others. All right, now once we've said good, I've landed in, what is this now, my 5th, here's a 5th core spiritual truth, that God reveals himself. Truth to me is like the understanding that we can discover through science and philosophy or receive through spiritual revelation of the realities of the cosmos and beyond. And so beauty is a quality of truth. Once you really find something that excites you, that thrills you, you can feel the beauty of that truth. There's a joy to it. There's a satisfaction, all kinds of shades of joy. But that's your introduction to the beauty of truth. Then we see beauty in other areas as well. The arts, for example, very important in the conversations that you host, many of them, Bruce, and very, very important to me. And then the goodness dimension, there's something in us that really wants and feels really good when we're in touch with that goodness. And so maybe that's enough for now. Core spiritual truths.
Okay. So Now, one of the things I've been involved for decades in the arts, and one of the things that I found annoying is when people mix up reality with truth. People often say art is truth, and I always differentiate it and point it out in something like this. And I want to know if this is what you mean by truth. Um, when when right now the reality is that Dan Schneider is interviewing Jeffrey Wattles via Skype. That's reality. When I state the term or state the sentence, Dan Schneider's interviewing Jeffrey Wattles via Skype, that's either true or false. So there's a difference between what reality is and the comment on it. To me, truth is always a comment on reality, and art in the same way is a comment on reality. And so is that so? And I don't think that's just you know a semantic difference. That's a real difference. The thing itself versus how it's perceived. And so truth to me is the perception of the thing out there. So when you talk about truth, are you talking about how you as an individual or how a philosophy can perceive the reality out there? And therefore that lets it open that there could be some other truth. Let's say some Buddhist might have a different truth looking at the same world, or let's say if there were extraterrestrials that had some other philosophy of life, that they could have as equally truthful a gaze upon the thing that we call existence.
Well, the topic of truth takes me 3 chapters in my book,
Okay.
and I can't go into that. Well, let's go as far as you like into this topic. When you started out, Dan Schneider is interviewing Jeffrey Wattles. I want to say that's a fact, and it's a fact that is true, and it's a true fact about reality. But there are other dimensions of truth as well, philosophical truths that you have to interpret to find. You don't just perceive and verify that way. And spiritual truths that I believe take faith in order to grasp them. But truth is always, if you will, truth of reality. But that reality is many-sided, so there can be other perspectives on it and other ways in which that's disclosed to this person or that person. I don't want relativism that says every opinion is as good as everything else. Hitler had his truth, and so on. I don't want that kind of relativism. But the idea that truth is something we interpret as well as something we discover, a spiritual perspective, as I see it, helps integrate those aspects of the concept of truth.
So then if we're talking about God, and you said that you'd grown up using the masculine pronoun, do you then see God as possibly being just a life force in the cosmos? Do you see that Godhead as being the cosmos itself? Or do you look at it more as literally that there is a being that's outside of time, outside of existence, that in essence, the universe, or whatever we want to say, everything the cosmos is sort of like a shadow play in his wake or its wake?
You've given me a very exciting array of options there. And my tendency when presented with options like that, I like to say all of the above, except that I don't identify God with cosmos. I want to say creator here. And so there's creator and creation. But if God is in you, then He's in creation. So and creation is in Him, and He's in us. So I don't want to see this the idea of a transcendent God in a one-sided way. I believe that science in our day has taught us a lot about God as force and energy and process and so on. But God is more than that. So I'm eager to hear your response.
Well, I mean, I'm currently an agnostic, but I was raised a Missouri Synod Lutheran, and when I was raised as a Lutheran, God was a definite being. The idea of people talk of a personal relationship with God, whether you want to say God, the Holy Ghost, Jesus, the Trinity, or whether you're Unitarian, or whether the various Christian denominations have slightly different belief systems. There was always the idea that you're praying and you're praying to get forgiveness for whatever sins you may have committed, for absolution, but you're praying to a definite thing, a definite being, a consciousness that is separate and apart from you. Because if you were part of God yourself, it would kind of make the Trinity kind of silly, because God was the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost as I grew up. So that's what it seems to me, and just from having read your website, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you have a more small c Catholic or ecumenical view of the cosmos that has sort of like little helpings of Orientalism dashed in there. So that's why I wanted to just get your idea of what a God is. If I'm part of God, doesn't that obviate the idea of a Trinity?
Uh, well, I certainly agree that we pray to a being. There is a person to whom we pray. There's a person whom we worship if we choose to allow our spiritual experience to develop in that way. So, and at that point, I'm 100% online with what you grew up with, as you stated it there. But the fact, if God is truth and the source of truth, then wherever you find it, I mean, there's truth. And I'm going to guess maybe you grew up with the idea that the Spirit of truth has been poured out upon all flesh. Well, if that's so, then it's not just no religion, no one religion has a monopoly on it. And so you find it here and there, and whenever you truly discern truth, or as best you can, it's a progressive adventure. Well, you're discerning God's truth. And I spent 6 years of time really focusing my available research energies on Chinese philosophy and Confucianism. And I taught world religions over the years. And if you go into those traditions with the idea, oh, I'm gonna see as many ways as I can that they're inferior to what I believe or disagree, or I mean, you can play that game, and a trained philosopher is going to notice that kind of thing. But if you go looking for truth, if you go looking for what we have in common, it seems to me we have lots and lots of things in common.
So let me talk about then some of the classical arguments that people throw about in comparative religion studies, and also just, I guess, in basic philosophy. The first thing, it comes, and you can tell me how you've dealt with this, the problem of evil in the world, because whether we're talking about a celebrity like Bill Cosby, who seemingly has spent decades raping people, whether we're talking about the various wars that go on, whether we're talking about serial killers or jihadists or organized criminals, or just people who are nasty to other people at work and try to screw them out of a promotion that they deserve or something. How do you, as an individual, how does your idea philosophy deal with evil? Because again, as I was raised as a Lutheran, the wicked are punished. You are sent to eternal damnation if you're an adulterer, if you're a murderer, if you're a thief, if you're a I guess what those are amongst the worst things that I remember being taught. So how do you deal personally, and how does your philosophy handle the problem of evil in the world if you have a God that is supposedly all knowing, all caring, all loving?
Well, at the end of my chapter on morally active living, I've got a 14-point answer to that question, and I can tell you I haven't memorized all the 14 points. But let me kind of give a start with this. If I approach that question, with resistance to the God concept, nothing I'm going to say is going to oblige you in intellectual responsibility to change your mind. Where I start with this is with the idea, taste and see that the Lord is good. I don't go to this question until after I've been through the spiritual pinnacle of my part one, called living the truth. and through, if some people come to it through conscious breathing, some people come to it through other kinds of meditation, but it's possible to have a personal experience of a transcendent, marvelous, wonderful goodness. And if we taste and see and have that beginning experience, that puts everything in perspective. The next point that I go to is there's the I don't know answer. In the Hebrew scriptures, in the book of Isaiah, second Isaiah, chapters 40 and so on, 40 through 55 at least, you've got this line where Isaiah is speaking on behalf of God. I can't remember perfectly, but as the heavens are above the earth, so I'm higher than everything. So if my ways transcend your ways, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so we can't understand how God works, and oftentimes, the I don't know answer. If someone asks, well, why did this happen? Oftentimes we say, I don't know, and I think that's part of an honest, compassionate answer. Sometimes being with the person who's suffering is much better than giving them 14 reasons why we can think of consistency here. But if I had to summarize it really quickly, I'd say, of course, the fact that God created us to be free, that means we can mess up big time, and that means we can mess up other people's lives big time. But we're in an evolutionary process. We're, the most awesome thing to me, take the book of Genesis. It starts out, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And if Jesus is right when he said that as part of the prayer that he taught, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. If there is a heaven where the will of God really does happen, well, then there's also this evolving sphere. So after God created this perfect marvelousness, then comes this awesome decision to create an evolving realm where perfection is something we grow towards. And when we do it in community, how many people, billions of people, do we have on the planet today? You probably have those statistics better than I, but I think it's over 7 billion right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we get in each other's hair, and things get rough. And then you have religion itself getting distorted, and people say, yikes, I don't want this. I happen to believe that the religion of hellfire and damnation is a perversion of the religious teachings. If you look at Sheol and Hades and Gehenna, those are the 3 words in the Bible that get translated heaven. Gehenna, which you find in the New Testament, means the valley of Hinnom, where they burned the garbage. It does not mean a place of eternal torture. In my opinion, the idea of eternal torture is a misinterpretation, a radical misinterpretation, and a religion of guilt and fear and threat of eternal torture is not what a loving God would do. So, but maybe I'll just stop at that point and say, take it away.
Well, it seems to me when I'm looking through some of your writings as I was preparing for the show, you seem to be a believer in human agency. And the very fact that you're talking about a new philosophy of living suggests that you believe that human beings can change. Now, the thing that I wonder then, do you then see that the struggle between good and evil is a metaphoric internal struggle that every individual goes through, or do you see it as the classical, satanic seducer, that I'm a 50-year-old man, for example, I'm married, but let's say if I met some hot 25-year-old girl and she seduced me and I committed adultery, would she then be a personified, temptation of that led me into evil, or do I have to own that evil for betraying my loved one?
I think we're responsible for what we do. I also think that science is showing us how important are neurological factors, psychosocial factors. There are a lot of things that push us in certain ways, and we can get ourselves into situations where our access to our freedom and our moral decision making power is really constrained. And I mean, our freedom is limited. But then here again, think of this line of Jesus: "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." So that's a way of saying that. Well, let's see now. I'm giving you my interpretation here. I think that after we become liberated, um, we still deal with these biochemical, social, psychological factors, and our liberation from these is not 100%. So I see freedom as gradual, but to say in that 25-year-old seducer, the devil made me do it, I think is a failure to take responsibility.
Well, let's end this segment and with one final thing. And basically, in this segment, I wanted to just sort of lay out some of your core belief systems. And in a couple of the later segments, we'll talk a little bit more about some real world applications. But to end this segment, you had mentioned that God created us to be free, and so that, of course, brings up the whole idea of human free will. And how can that be? Because doesn't that obviate an all-knowing God? Because if God knows everything, he would have to fundamentally know every possible thing that we could do and that we will do. Otherwise, he's not all-knowing. And again, this is what I was taught as a Christian, is that or as a Lutheran and a Missouri Synod Lutheran, which is a more hardline Lutheran, is that when you're 5 or 6 years old praying in that pew, God knows what you're going to sin when you're 67 years old. He knows what you're going to do. And that's a kind of very inhibiting thing for someone, because it kind of brings up the point, well, what's the point of anything? If God knows what I'm going to do, if something or someone knows what I'm going to do, good, bad, or indifferent, at 12:31 p.m. in the afternoon on May 5th, 1987, and it's 1972, you're like, am I just going through the motions then? So how do you reconcile that classic conundrum of an all-knowing God with human free will?
I'll say just a couple of things about that. Suppose you've got an older, wiser supervisor and a new recruit for the team in the workplace, let's say. And the older, wiser supervisor knows where this course of action is going to lead. That the new employee is taking. It doesn't mean that the new employee is not free. But the other thing I would say in this regard, theologically speaking, is that I believe it's very important to see the omnipotence of God, the all-powerfulness of God, as also capable of self-limitation. God could fill infinity with total perfection, and there would be no space in it for finite, imperfect beings like us. But God limits himself to make a space for creation. And I also believe that God may choose to limit his foreknowledge of sin. So that's as far as I can go theologically on that. I certainly have the experience of freedom, and I believe that an honest reading of the teachings of Jesus is not consistent with a denial of human freedom, A to Z denial of human freedom.
Okay. So you think then that each individual creates their own meaning in life then?
Uh, well, let's see. That's a very significant extension of your question. Let me comment on that a little bit.
Okay.
Uh, I think I think meaning is something that, as children growing up, we absorb through the culture, through language. Meaning is there with language, and then to some extent, we're participants in that process because we form our concepts by associating certain things. Maybe we're struggling with a problem, and we're going to put the pieces together, and we may make some new discoveries in this. I believe that there are eternal truths in the mind of God that structure the creation, and sometimes we get maybe a partial glimpse of one of those. So I don't think meaning is totally a human construction. It's not totally a social construction, partly a personal construction. So all these three are factors.
Okay, well, let's end this segment on that note, and we get back in the next couple of segments. We'll try to expand out and maybe give some uh, examples that I can give, and maybe Jeffrey, you can give some examples that illustrate some of your beliefs, and we'll do that in a moment. Back with Jeffrey Wattles, and I wanted to, in this next segment, expand a little bit on some of the points that were made in the first main segment. Uh, One of the things that, well, let me start from a basic day-to-day premise that everyone deals with, and that's love between people, and then I'll move out to some more cosmic concerns. One of the things that I always find troubling when I see young people, especially, and I'm 50 years old, so I'm sort of in dead middle age. But when I see teenagers or people in their early 20s, college age, they talk how they want to be loved unconditionally. And I know the idea of unconditional love really comes with the idea of religious love. But I know, for example, that when I was young, before I was married, I didn't want to be loved unconditionally. I wanted to be loved for the very conditions that make me a unique individual. Because if I am loved unconditionally, well, then someone isn't really looking to love me per se. They're just looking for love. Because Joe Blow down the block, or Billy Bob, or Henry are equally capable of receiving, let's say, the love of a woman. Uh, Whereas if someone says, well, Dan, I love you. I love you because I love your poetry. I love you because you're a hard worker, that you're a good provider, that you're honest, whatever good qualities I may or may not have. So I've never really understood the idea, at least on a human to human level, of someone wanting to be unconditionally loved. Yes, as a baby, you want your mother to love you unconditionally. And I can understand from a philosophical, religious idea, the idea of an all loving thing out there that accepts you. But on a human level, that seems to me absolutely contradictory to real, true, genuine love. Um, what are your thoughts on that, Jeffrey?
Thank you for that fabulous question, Dan. Um, I want to say that there is a love that can be both universal and as unique to you as possible. Um, let's see. I'm so close to just this book that I've just finished that I get tangled up wanting to say all of it at once. But let me just say that it seems to me that the core of love is seeing that unique personality that you are. And I want to say you are given to be. I regard that okay, now when I say unique personality, I'm not using the word in a standard psychological sense. There was a philosopher named Nikolai Berdyaev that developed this concept in a book called Slavery and Freedom. His first chapter, What is Personality, is one of the all-time great breakthroughs, in my opinion, on the topic of personality. And he understood or interpreted personality as constant, um, through change. It's unique, a number of other characteristics of it. But when a grandmother comes to the grandchild she hasn't seen in a number of years, she grabs the grandchild's cheek and says, "My, how you've grown." And when we say grown, we're talking about change. Change, of course, we know that. But when she says how you've grown, she's naming you as the same person who's gone through that change. Now, in the life to come, if you say yes to that opportunity, then we'll look different, but we'll be able to recognize each other as the same personality that we once recognized before. So that personality is unique, and when someone grasps that personality, when they get to know you enough to really see, there's a Dan Schneider-ness that's just unique. There's only one of you in the entire universe, and you're the one. And they love you for being that. And I believe that God sends the Spirit to be the nucleus of that personality. And when they're seeing that personality that comes straight from God and that, indwelt by that Spirit, however it manifests in you, they're just seeing magnificence. And they're also seeing the unique you that's not the same as Tom, Dick, and Harry down the street. But now there's more to love than only looking at that, gazing at the thrilling wonderfulness of that indwelt personality. And that's, the rest of us, body, mind, evolving soul as I see it. And there's where love means, support and affection. Love is not just for that which is most beautiful in someone. Love is for the whole package. And that whole package is an evolving, growing, decision-making package. And to love that whole is a different kind of adventure than just that focus on the unique, spiritually indwelt personality.
Well, when you talk about an indwelled personality, a soul, and I'll use this as a bridge to get to some questions about ethos and morality, but what is meant by a soul? Because when people think of a soul, I guess, I think of the beginning of It's a Wonderful Life, where there's like this little speck of light up there in the cosmos, and it's looking to go in and maybe live the life of someone. There's the idea philosophically of that a being is not, and people have used the metaphor, for example, that life is like a roller coaster. But the idea that the roller coaster, the person is not the person riding the roller coaster, but the roller coaster itself, meaning that any number of souls could live, say, the Jeffrey Wattles experience and think of themselves as Jeffrey Wattles. I mean, there's an idea of what's called the block universe, and that everything that ever has or will be exists at some point, meaning that when you were, say, 15 and maybe got your first kiss, or when you were 3 years old and skinned your knee for the first time, there's always that Jeffrey Wattles that is skinning his knee and getting his first kiss. So when we talk about ensoulment, are you talking then that you or I or anyone listening to this, or any human being, or any perhaps sentient being, if there are extraterrestrials, is unique and is something? Is it something that evolves? Because I don't have any memories of my first 6 months or my first year and a half. Am I ensouled at that time, or is it something that is always imminent from the moment you're born, or even conceived, if you want to go that far? What do you mean by soul, basically?
Wow, I love your questions because they show so much background of reading and sharp interest and a variety of ideas that you're considering. First of all, let me distinguish soul from spirit. Spirit, as I interpret that, comes straight from God. It's like a spark or a fragment of the divine nature that comes to live within us and be our guide. It gives us energy, wisdom, intuition, insight, creativity, guidance, purpose, all these things that it comes to us, increasingly as we open ourselves up and begin to cooperate more with it. Now, the soul I see as the deeper true self. Remember when Bob Dylan had the song, I gave her my heart, but she wanted my soul. There's a distinction there. Usually people use the word soul, I'm not talking about in a theological context here, but just in a general, human context. They use the word soul to mean a deeper part of me. And so I see that soul as evolving. Exactly when it starts, I don't want to weigh in on that question, but it seems to me that the more we follow the guidance of the Spirit, the more our soul is evolving beautifully. And I guess I'll let it go there.
Well, you mentioned the soul as the deeper part of the being, the self. And it makes me think of a psychological term called the mask effect, whereas people who wear masks are more likely to do bad things if they can't be identified as an individual. For example, people have often had fantasies about being invisible, and when they do, they often report that they would do all kinds of things like rob a bank or maybe violate a woman sexually or something like that. Think groups like the Ku Klux Klan, aside from hiding their identity criminally, it's often been posited that a Klansman might not want to string up a black person or burn down a black church if they were known as that person, not just for criminal consequences, but they can hide from themselves. So I'm wondering if the soul is the true self, do you then look at the day-to-day being, what we present to the cosmos, to the world, as a Jeffrey Wattles or a Dan Schneider or a Joe Blow who's listening to this? Is that a mask, and does that account possibly for evil, in that we do bad things, we lie on we cheat on our taxes, we lie to our friends, we embezzle, we cut someone off and almost cause an accident on a highway because we are hidden, our true selves are hidden? And if so, how do we, or any philosophy, yours or any other, get to that truer person, that soul that might be a better individual than what we present to the cosmos?
Well, your questions are exceedingly artistic in the way that they take psychological data and I don't think I'm capable of answering your question head on, but this is the way I will approach the question. I recently read a book called The Compassionate Life, and one of the chapters in this book is of a guy who is a prisoner. He's never going to get out. He committed a horrible, horrible crime of killing this wonderful, wonderful person. And he did it under the influence of crack cocaine. And he had known that, terrible things could happen with cocaine. And if I remember right, it happened earlier in his life. But after, threatening her and walking out of her house, she treated him so well when he initially came to threaten her that he walked out of the house. But then he took crack. And then he got this, and I guess there's a generalized psychological phenomenon here where you're commanded to do something horrible. And he, maybe you feel it's, a superhuman command that you're being called to execute. And he felt that insistent, overwhelmingly powerful command a few times, and then went in and did this horrible thing, and he's paying for it the rest of his life. Now, I'd want to say that the action that he did not represent his true self, his self off cocaine. Not only did it not represent his soul, in my opinion, it did not represent his normal, sane mind. I think I'll leave it at that.
So by sort of taking off from that, there could be then you're open to the possibility that there could be some force or agency that gets between the real self and the self that's presented to the cosmos, and there's something that could say basically run interference, because using that example that you just gave of a drug, uh, you know, changing someone's persona or personality, that would be the likely inference what I'm getting from you.
I don't think we walk around wearing masks. I mean, people do form masks in some sense, but I want to say that what happens is that the drug plays havoc with the brain, and then the mind goes wild. I mean, I want to say that command came out of a deeply troubled mind, and that was the mind of this man who did this horrible murder of this wonderful, wonderful person. But I think I want to work a bit on this idea of mask. I don't think we go around everybody having a mask such that our material presentation of ourselves as embodied thinking, discoursing, social, it's not necessarily a mask. People put on masks. I am the professor, or I am the whatever it is. I mean, there are those kinds of masks that people acquire, but they don't put them on in order to conceal their horrible deeds, or in order to conceal themselves from being recognized as they go forth to do their horrible deeds. So I want to kind of make some distinctions about the idea of mask here.
Okay. Well, let's talk then about morality versus ethos, and I want to distinguish the two, because growing up, I was taught morals as a religious person. I had my 7-year Sunday school pin from the age of 3 to 9, and morals were basically the 10 Commandments and ancillary ideas that came out of that. And you don't do this, because if you do that, it's evil, and if it's evil, you'll get punished. So there's a risk and reward behavior there. Ethos or ethics comes from a more secular human background, the idea that we behave, or most people behave, in an ethical manner because we have evolved to do so, i.e. that ethics are good for the society at large. For example, if we were in caveman society, I go out, and me and the 2 or 3 elder males in the tribe kill an animal, we butcher it, we cook it up, and we don't just eat it, we share it with the women, we share it with the children, because that way our progeny, our mates are healthy, we can then procreate more, our tribe can grow more than maybe the other tribe down the river, and if they ever attack us, we'll be strong. So there's that ethics, in a sense, evolved out of basically survival instincts, and it's good to be good to those who are good to you, because it helps you in the long run. And so there isn't any outside force. So I always view morals as something that religion imposes from without into the human life, whereas ethics sprung naturally, at least if you're a secular humanist, sprung naturally out of the course of existence into the human predicament. So that's how I would define the two. do you take objection to that, or do you find simpatico with those sort of definitions that I've given?
Uh, Both of the above. First of all, there certainly is a religious approach to morals that you have described. Uh, I, I'm a religious ethicist too, but mine is different from that in important ways. And regarding the evolutionary component, I quite agree that there are evolutionary forces, and a lot of people are talking about behavior of primates and gorillas and chimpanzees and other animals. There's a chapter in this book, The Compassionate Life, on those that's really very, very touching. But I regard genuine morality as being more than just an animal origin evolutionary cooperative mechanism. I regard there to be something of universality there. Beyond my tribe versus your tribe, there's a concept of human being. Seems to me once we get to the idea of human being, we're looking at the planet at the very least. We're looking at the planet. We're looking at humankind as a whole. And tribal morality will not do, I believe, in this age when we've got such terrific, in some sense, tribal-like conflicts going on the planet. So I believe that moral reason gives us the possibility of universal moral concepts like the Golden Rule or so on. You can talk about the evolution of the Golden Rule as a phenomenon, and my first book was titled The Golden Rule, and I did trace the rule historically in China and ancient Greece and in the Hebrew scriptures and so on down to current philosophy, psychology, and religion. So I think there's that history there, but I think at this point I'll hand it back to you.
Well, the Golden Rule certainly has its secular equivalents as well, and that leads into the idea of do you believe that you have to be religious in order to lead a good and productive life? I.e., could an agnostic, someone without any religion, not just a religion that's different from whatever you or your tribe would believe, can find a way to lead a good life, i.e., the many paths to nirvana kind of idea?
Let's see here. First of all, I want to say, no, you don't have to be religious to have a good life. But what I want to say is that if you've got a hard edge, heels dug in, clinch-fisted, no, I'm not going to have anything to do with God, anything to do with spirit. God doesn't force anything on you. Spirit doesn't force itself into your mind. That's got to be something voluntary. I do believe that without a spiritual connection, that life is not going to be of the fullness that it can. Without that, and that connection can be conscious or unconscious. That's what makes the game interesting, because there are any number of religious people who are unwitting secularists, and there are any number of people who would even say, I don't even want to talk about spirit, who have that connection. It's so transcendent with respect to mind, even though it's within us, that it's when things are going well, one's not thinking, the spirit, what's the spirit saying to me right now? It's kind of a self-forgetting spontaneity. So I want to say yes, someone with no religion whatsoever can have that connection and it can be effective. But if you don't have that connection, then you can be moral in a number of ways. You can be a good citizen in a number of ways, but you're not going to have the good life in its fullness.
So we're recording here now in the year 2015, and that means Anno Domini, or supposedly after the birth of Jesus Christ, a religious figure. As we record, what do you, as both an American looking at American society and as a citizen of the planet looking at global human society, what do you see as, let's start with the positive stuff, as the positive things that are going on in the world as we know it, and then some of the negative stuff? And they can be social, they can be things like global warming, they could be whatever. Let's start with what you think are the positive things in both American and global life right now.
I think conversations like this are one of the positive things. I mean, the fact that we live in a country where there's free discussion, where people can criticize, can raise critical questions, can be different religious in different ways, non-religious in different ways. I give thanks for that. I happen to believe that the real power that transforms human life and will sooner or later transform humankind is spiritual. And so I see the germs of the dawning spiritual renaissance. Now, whether that dawning goes like a river underground for a while and then it comes up in some later generation or century, I have no idea. But I see a lot of people who are open and idealistic and energetic and doing their best to give back or make the world a better place. There are people who are looking for a higher quality of thinking. There are people who are opening themselves to the great questions. I think questioning religion is a terribly important thing to do. But staying open in that questioning, I think, is also very important to do. So I see so much good in the hearts of, you hear all about bad religion. And I remember, when I was in seminary taking a course in sociology of religion, and I heard generalizations about, that outwardly speaking would describe the church that I grew up in, Congregational Church in Rockford, Illinois. And but it didn't describe the people I knew there. I knew individuals who were profoundly spiritual, just doing awesome things with their lives. But they were just covered by a blanket sociological description. So when people, I'm starting to get into negatives now. But I see, I see so much good. If you look for the good, there's so much to find. So globally, I see a lot of wonderful things globally. I think the fact that people are reaching out beyond nationalistic attitudes, which, when I say nationalism, I mean the idea that the interests of my nation are supreme and dominant and should be pursued regardless of the costs to other nations. I do think, in terms of your evolutionary research that you were quoting early on, that's long-run suicidal for the planet, given where we are today with our armaments. But there's so much wonderfulness around the world. So many people who are idealistic and open and optimistic and collaborating across boundaries. That's just the start of an answer.
Well, let's talk then about current society, and we'll stick more towards the West and America. One of the things that I've seen in my years, and most people decry this throughout the centuries, but there seems to always be the idea that hedonism is always there, and that live for the moment, don't plan out things, just take what you can right now. And to me, it comes in many different forms. When I think of like if you're ever on things like Facebook, social media, or whatnot, we get all of this vapid stuff. Some celebrity has written something negative or said something negative about someone else. You know, some person, you know, farted near a squirrel and they made a video of it, and this becomes the thing that's tweeted around the world or whatnot, rather than say a discussion like this. You have people who will, as I mentioned, recently a comedian named Bill Cosby has been accused of raping a number of women. There was a television show about this. Where what is your view on hedonism? And do you see that hedonism in current Western society as something that's an ill, something that should be dealt with in not you know the way a totalitarian society might, but do you see it as an ill, and what kind of remedy do you see for something like that?
Um, That's a beautiful, beautiful question. I love your question. I'm very sympathetic with the question. I want to suggest two things. First of all, uh, I want to say that a lot of that superficiality and vapid celebrity pursuing waste of time, in my opinion, it's not all waste of time. I don't see people that should never do that. But we're starting to understand the neuroscience of addiction to social media. But there's something else I want to say. I think part of it is a flight. You know, this world's got very, very serious problems. And one of the ways to not deal with it, not face those problems honestly, is to spend your time, way too much of your time doing that kind of thing. But the other answer that I want to share with you is the experience that really is very, very much at the basis of this new book that's going to come out at Cascade Books next summer, Living in Truth, Beauty, and Goodness. And that is, I was privileged, mostly at Kent State University, to take over 3,000 students through experiential projects in truth, beauty, and goodness, where they had to interpret these ideas. You know, we have the philosopher or the religious tradition that we're looking at in the course for this, number of weeks, and I take what I think is the most universally attractive and worthwhile teaching out of this material, and I say here, adapt this any way you like. Make it more religious or less religious or differently secular, however you like, until you get something that you feel good about putting into practice. And then go, if you want, this is not required, and be psychologically wise about what you tackle, but if there's a front burner issue, the number one growth priority in your life that could really use some leverage, just apply scientific living or philosophical or spiritual or artistic living or morally active living or growing your character ethos in that sense. Whatever the course is about, apply that in your life and see what happens, and then write about your experiences and how those experiences relate to what we're studying. And with just that project, people went out and transformed themselves. It was, now, not everybody, about 10% of the people, I would say, kind of tried to stay under the radar and just didn't really participate with verve. But I would say roughly 2/3 of the people had breakthrough experiences, potentially life transformative if they stay with the breakthrough that they achieved. Relationships got transformed. Awesome things happen in those classes because they had an educational regime that was constructed, a way of making education and meaning and value real and alive. And and when people experience that, then they tend to fall in love with what they're discovering. And those kind of perspective changing experiences make a tremendous difference in someone's life. The pathos of teaching is that 99% you never know what people do with that. They don't stay in touch, and you don't chase them around saying, following up, are you still doing this? But that's another hopeful thing that I see that can help people beyond hedonism and beyond just this mindlessness in which we as a culture spend so much of our lives.
Yeah, I had mentioned earlier what I called the mask effect, and let me just throw this out as a hypothetical. I think one of the things, if I were to look at from an artistic perspective, one of the things that I look at the hedonism, the shallowness, the vapidity of modern culture is I think people are always talking about they want to escape from their job or their life or their wife or their boss or their situation, whatever it might be. And so they think that if they watch some silly cable show or they're tweeting or they're thising or thatting, that it's going to somehow act as an anodyne to what ails them. And I think what ails them is that reality, life is hard. It's not as hard, say, as if you're living in the New Guinea highlands and have to stay on your toes for predators all the time. But life is hard, and the thing that makes modern life hard for most people generally is other people and their desire for this, that, or the other thing. And I think one of the things that I approach art as is that artists are translators of reality. If you read Moby Dick, it's not about a whale. It's not about even Ahab being mentally or psychologically or spiritually sick. It's about a specific time and place and how that is universal. If you look at a great painting, you can see the struggle of someone or something against something else. If you read a great poem or you're listening to a great symphony by Mozart or Beethoven, you get an idea, you get a little glimpse of something deeper and whatnot. And I think people want to shun away from that because it's difficult to connect to that sort of thing. So I'm wondering, what do you think of sort of my analysis there, and how does that fit in? Do you think with an urge for something higher that might lead someone to a spiritual or religious existence?
Oh, I love your question, Dan. It's beautiful. Everything you were just saying, I couldn't agree more. And the examples that you gave of works of art and authors and composers, just expand my sense of bond with you. So really, I'm on your side in that regard. But now, if life is hard, we want to fight with, not with one hand tied behind our back. And if there's power in the spirit, we could use that. And I believe there are two ways to learn lessons, the easy way and the hard way. And most of the time we learn the hard way. I've learned a lot of stuff the hard way. As a human race, we've learned a lot of things the hard way, and what we're going through right now, I believe, is a very rough transition, because the old way of selfishness and materialism is destroying itself, and the new and better way of integrated living, I want to call it spiritual living, spiritually integrated, centered living, is emerging as this terribly destructive process continues. And in my opinion, it's a question of how much more misery we're going to put ourselves through before we once again come and say, maybe we've got some major lessons to learn. Maybe we got to go back to square one and align with these deeper meanings and values that we find in a Melville novel that has its universal dimensions. I mean, think of this character Queequeg, this awesome character Queequeg and these struggles. And when you talk about Beethoven, I'm sure you've seen Fidelio and this heroic opera of of the of the of the heroic attacker of the tyrant there in early 19th century Vienna, when Napoleon the tyrant has just kind of you know, fastened his grasp upon Vienna and imprisons the resistor. Not Napoleon, but now in the opera, the tyrant imprisons the resistor, and the noble wife at the risk of her life goes to liberate him in the prison, and you know there's the happy ending of it all, but the happy endings don't come without colossal risk. And I think we live in a time when colossal risk is what we're living with, and so it's that added power. And I just I give thanks for the Mozarts and the Beethovens and the Melvilles who dug deep and found that and are still ways in which we access it, very, very important ways in which we access it.
Let me end this middle segment with questioning one of your sort of three pillars, and then we'll, in our final segment, we'll dig a little deeper, and I'll give some specific examples of certain things that I'd like to hear your comments on. But you talk with your new philosophy of living the truth, walking in beauty, and growing in goodness, and I think very few people would disagree with the negative connotations of, say, deceit and badness, but I have trouble with the idea of walking in beauty, because I don't see beauty as being as high a virtue as the other two, and I don't see ugliness nearly being as bad a negative as the other two, because to me beauty is certainly a human quality. I mean, you've mentioned some scientific studies. We know, for example, about the golden ratio when it comes to, say, human sexuality. We know about the symmetry of face, and there have been children, babies who are only 3 or 4 weeks old, that have been shown, pictures of supermodels and pictures of, your average or a bag woman, who's all dissipated or whatnot, and they're drawn to the beautiful face. To me, ugliness has a value, because certainly ugliness is needed for us to even be able to calibrate beauty. So I've never really understood this idea, and I really sort of chafe against it in art when people talk about art as beauty. To me, as I said, art is about translating reality, and one of the key components of reality is ugliness. And I don't just mean, say, an ugly soul, which we could ascribe more readily as badness, but an ugly person is interesting. If you look at some of the greatest photographs ever taken, they're not necessarily of supermodels or celebrities. Some of the most interesting works of art are not particularly going to inspire, the divinely look upward, look upward. It's something that gets into you and gnaws at you and makes you wonder, why am I revulsed by this? So if you could explain why you have seemingly elevated beauty alongside truth and goodness, because frankly, I don't think it's as important.
All right. Once again, I'm sympathetic with so much of what you say, but I want to say that there's beauty on lots of levels. You can have an ugly outside and a beautiful inside, and think of the Jewish Museum Berlin. That museum is architecturally designed to put the museum goer into a space of disorientation, an uncanny space in which our normal sense of geographic rootedness and sense of direction is just modified enough so that we feel as though our very bearing in reality is out of kilter. radically out of kilter. And that's part of what gives that museum such power as we go through it. I remember at Buchenwald, seeing the first thing I saw on my magnificently led tour of the Nazi concentration camp at Buchenwald was the photograph of, I'm going to say 25, 35, Jewish prisoners who were lined up, and they were lined up, I would say, fresh before they'd been, tortured with this dehumanizing abuse for so long that they were shells of themselves. And the beauty and dignity of those faces shining out in the photograph. The photograph wasn't designed to be an artistic photograph, but I'm never going to forget the beauty of that of those faces, in those striped prisoner uniforms. So I want to say there's beauty on all kinds of levels, and the fact that the arts can inspire us is very important. I agree with you. If I had to rank, I would rank beauty below truth and goodness. So, but I also want to say, and a number of other scholars who've worked on these values agree that truth is beautiful and good, and beauty is true and good, and goodness is true and beautiful. There's a Asian culture, East Asian culture I'm thinking of especially, is a culture in which the beauty of goodness and the beauty of character is really appreciated. And it's not about, celebrity proportioned faces at all. So I think you'll see that we've got a massive territory of overlap in our thinking, and some perhaps areas to follow up on after our break.
All right. Well, let's take that break, and when we get back, I'll give some more specific examples, and we'll try to wrap up the interview, and we'll do that in a moment. In this final major segment with Jeffrey Wattles, a philosopher, and I guess, could I call you a theologian technically, or?
You can call me a religious philosopher.
Religious philosopher. Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about some specifics, but I want to start something, I guess, more cosmic, and then sort of work down to the more diurnal. A lot of people have, I guess, a kind of ruing, a sadness, existential angst because their existence is finite. We are mortal beings as far as we know. This is probably what has given rise to beliefs in many cultures of some kind of life after death. And I know one of my impulses to make art and to try to make that art as great as possible, and I know other artists have that same thing, is just like we leave heirs with our biological descendants, we want to have an effect after life with our art, just the way Melville can affect someone with a passage from a great short story or book that he wrote, the way that Mozart's music can live on centuries after he did, just the way that Confucius, a couple of millennia after he existed, can have some influence. And, there's sort of a sadness that everything you ever experienced is lost when you're gone. So, number one, do you believe in existence after life or after death? And if so, what kind of mechanism do you believe is behind such things? Since it seems clear biologically, scientifically, that our brains create our minds. Our minds are the sum of our experiences. How does that sustain itself after the biological entity that we consider ourselves is gone?
Okay, you've asked a few big questions, and I'll try to give answers that are reasonably brief. First of all, I certainly believe in an afterlife, and my biggest reason comes from the experience of being in relationship with my Heavenly Father, whose Spirit dwells within me. And when you have that relationship, when the friendship kindles there, it's logically possible, that the friend could say, well, we've had a nice time relating, but it's your time to go now, and bye-bye, I'll never see you again. Or the friend could also say, well, it's your time to go to sleep now, but you'll wake up in the morning and we can keep the friendship going with the society on high. Now, how does that come about? You said it's scientifically obvious the brain creates the mind. I would take some difference from that way of putting it. I think there's no question that the brain has a very extensive effect upon the mind, but to say creates or originates the mind, is something that I want to say has not been shown. If you do cosmology only with a scientific lens, you've already eliminated God from the picture, and you're pretending that we can analyze the whole coming forth of the universe as resulting from an explosion that had no reason behind it 13.7 billion years ago. But no one explains how in the attempted reconstruction of that, getting as close as we can to figuring out, what happened in the beginning, you try to get super close and the laws of physics make no sense. It's as though if you posit that primordial chaos, all of a sudden the laws of physics kick in. Well, where does that come from? Or let's look at the transition between life and non-life. Who has got an explanation for that? A lot of people assume that it's, of course, some complicated biochemical something with energies and molecules. Somehow, accidentally, you have molecule systems that got to self-replicating, self-reproducing, and then suddenly you get consciousness. But if you're philosophical about that and read a variety of well-informed perspectives, some of which are religiously informed, you see that tissue of uniform explanation of all things from a Big Bang through the origin of life and the development of consciousness, that breaks down at places, and there are gaps and there are mysteries there. Now, I regard the Creator as pouring forth energy, which materializes as matter and mind and spirit, life, and I don't regard everything as an accidental modification of matter. So that's where I take issue with the premise of your question.
Getting back to some of the pillars, we talked a little bit about beauty before the break, and we've talked about truth. Let's talk a little bit about goodness, because sometimes good intent doesn't lead to good results. A good impulse does not necessarily mean the same thing for everyone. I'll give you an example, and let me just give me a minute or two to tease it out. When I was a little boy, my dad and I would play games. We'd play checkers, we'd play pokers, and he never let me win. I'd have to win on my own wits. When I was really young, 3, 4 years old, my dad would come to tuck me into bed, and he'd try to test my strength. So I would have my feet and my legs to try to hold back his chest on his chest, and he'd push. And until I was 6 or 7, I didn't have strong enough legs to resist his pushing, and he wouldn't let me win at those kinds of things. And I remember about maybe less than a year ago on Facebook seeing some video that was making the rounds that was getting a lot of praise, and what would be called a very politically correct situation, which was this, was that there was some champion wrestler at the high school. He was the top wrestler in the school, and uh, there was a retarded boy, a wrestler who wanted to, I guess, feel good about himself. So what they did was they had the champion wrestler lay down on the floor, and they, I know, two or three people came and they draped the retarded boy, who was also in a wheelchair, on top of the champion wrestler, who just laid there, and they pounded 1, 2, 3 that the retarded boy would win. And people are saying, "Oh, how sweet this was, and how this taught good values." And to me, this was antithetical to the notion of good sportsmanship, as my dad had taught me. And it seems to me that the idea in society currently is that whatever makes you feel good has to be good. And it gets back to what I was saying about ugliness. There's virtue in feeling bad. There's virtue. I mean, no one wants people to be manically depressed. But if you're depressed over something, if you lose a job, if your girlfriend leaves you, it gives you a reason to evaluate, did you have a part in that? And maybe you didn't do anything to lose your job. Maybe you didn't do anything to cause your girlfriend to go away. Maybe it was something at the work, or a boss who was just not a good person, or maybe your girlfriend just grew away from you. So I think a lot of times people have this idea that they have this good impulse, but it leads, I think, to sometimes negative consequences. Not always. And I'm wondering how you would reconcile the good impulse with perhaps the not good result.
Well, I agree with everything you've said in this long setup question here, and let me just say that I'm very concerned that people develop their their intellectual gifts so that they think more about things. If what feels good often isn't good, and I see a lot of religious people acting on impulse that they think, oh, I prayed, this is what came up, and I'm going with it, and they go off, and maybe they don't pray, they just feel inspired, and they don't consider things carefully, and it's a huge problem. So but on the other hand, sometimes you do something good and you feel great about it. And I think that feeling great about it when you're doing something good or make a wonderful decision, I think that's the spirit within you that's giving you feedback. Yes, you're on the path. So I'm very sympathetic. We should be wiser parents. And we should help everybody, retired or not, have whatever triumphs they are capable of having. But I think pretending so that someone looks like they're having a triumph that they're not really having is perhaps, in most cases, long run unhelpful to a society that cheers that kind of thing on.
Well, let me give a final example to toss out, and then we'll wrap up this interview, and I'll let you have some closing remarks on whatever you want to say. Um, in a similar vein, about a year or so ago, I found out that this woman that I had known and been involved with back in the 1980s, over a quarter of a century ago, had died, and she was about a year or two older than me, and she had lived at least the life when I knew her. She was doing drugs all the time. She was very sexually promiscuous, and at she was a writer who was fairly well known in New York. And when they did obituaries in some of the local newspapers, I really found kind of revulsive the fact that they didn't talk about some of the negative things. And I'm not saying that she did anything necessarily criminal, but the and I'm not saying that you have to dwell on people's negative things, but when you're writing things about someone to sort of puff them up, I think it does a disservice. I remember when my dad died and I saw him in the funeral casket. I felt a kind of primal revulsion when I saw that they had put a lot of makeup on him. Now, my dad had died of cancer for 3 years, and the last time I saw him when he died, he was very emaciated and he wore his suffering. And his last few moments were not self-pitying. There was a kind of dignity there that the makeup sort of hid. It made him look like a mannequin, a non-being. And I had the same kind of revulsion to some of the words written in some of the obituaries about this woman that I had known and been involved with, because it tried to make her into something that the survivors wanted, rather than someone who she really was, good, bad, or indifferent. And overall, she was probably a good person. I'm not denying that. But if you don't acknowledge those kinds of things that may have led to her death, and I don't want to get into everything, but may have led to her death, you're again moving away from the truth or the reality of life. And I think there's a kind of cultural sickness about that. So before I give you your own final remarks, if you have any comments on that kind of thing, because certainly I'm not the only one that's ever experienced that.
Well, I'm very moved by what you said in both cases, especially in the case of your father, whose last moments of life were, maybe this is my word, not yours, heroic and courageous and facing everything. It's magnificent. So I couldn't agree more that your loss was aggravated by the makeup. You know, I've been to a number of funerals, and I'm trying to remember one where some of the downside of the person's character was brought into the picture, and how well that was done and how I appreciated it, but I can't remember details enough to be helpful here. The only thing that I'd say on behalf of that positive look back is, insofar as that look is remembering things well, there's something to that. Of course, I say as one who believes that the soul of a person who said yes to God, in whatever different ways that can happen, if we've said net yes, we go forward, and in going forward, we take with us the character harvest of our lives. Now, the day after my father died, I was very fortunate at Kent State University to attend the first of a 3-4 week session on grieving process. I knew my dad was dying, also of cancer, and I knew the end was coming on, and I saw the notice for this, and I signed up for it, and it began the next day. And the first lesson in the first session was, when someone has died, if it's tell the stories about the person that you knew, tell about how it's different now, tell about, I can't remember, the third question doesn't come to mind. But I thought, well, this is a good idea, and I came home and I asked my beloved wife Hagiko to go for a drive with me, because I wanted to tell the stories, and my relation with my father had a lot of positive in it, and it had a lot of negative in it too. And I wanted to get some of that negative off my chest, and I realized in starting to do that my father had been very important to her, and had been a father figure to her because her own father had been a terrible father model. And I realized that it was unhelpful for her, for me to be going through some of my stuff about, the side of my father that had been difficult for me. It was a net positive relationship by far, but there was this other. And there was a moment when on the road, as we were driving, I saw 6 luminous orbs on a string, so to speak, on a thread. And I saw those orbs come together and fuse. And to me, that symbolized, help yourself to interpret differently, but to me that symbolized that my father made it to heaven and that he's going to make it into eternal life. That's what that meant to me. So I think that when we remember that which is of survival value at our best, we image that somewhat cleansing process as we exit this life for something greater.
Well, Jeff, people who have enjoyed this interview can find more about you and your at your website, anewphilosophyofliving.com. If you want to take a few minutes just to have some closing remarks on whatever you want to, go ahead, please.
Well, at the moment, I think I'm going to want to talk about arts a little bit, and I want to pick up 2 things. First, from Aeschylus, that ancient Greek tragedian of the 5th century. He wrote 2 plays that are interesting to me right now. One is called The Suppliant Maidens, one is called The Persians. I'll start with The Persians. Greece, the Greek city-states, I should say, suffered twice a powerful invasion from Persia, which twice failed. And nothing was easier than for the Greeks, with their tremendous achievements in civilization, to feel so proud of themselves and so great, and to despise those Persians who'd attacked them. And in this drama called The Persians, Aeschylus portrayed the grieving in court over the soldiers and sailors who had died, and portrayed that grief with such sympathy that an honest and open Greek Athenian audience would have to be moved. We know something about how powerful were the plays in the Athenian community. And then in The Suppliant Maidens, he told a story about Greeks on the island of Argos, and a boat lands on the shore carrying 50 women, virgins in fact, who are running away, fleeing from these dark Egyptians who are pursuing them to force them into marriage. And their spokesperson asks the king of the Argives to protect them, going to war, if need be, to protect these women. And there's this debate that goes on in the mind of the king. And the spokesperson for the women says, he narrates a long, complex genealogy showing that both the Egyptians, and let's remember, we're at a time when the Greeks felt they had such great reason to look down on those Egyptians. But the genealogy of the gods that is traced here, that persuades the king to go deep and make his decision, is a genealogy that makes these women also related to Zeus, the king of the gods. And so at the source personality, at the very top of the rankings of the gods, these people are kin. There's family bonds, extended family bonds, if you will, between them. But on that basis, the king goes to make his decision. And I just think that's an example of the arts at their best, and how they use language to uplift the society and keep it going further. And the last thing I'm going to mention is a poem by Rabindranath Tagore, and he was a Nobel Prize winning poet from Bengal, and he worked with Gandhi for a while, but they had different visions of what national greatness for India meant, and different visions of how to go about it, and so they remained kindred minds and kindred spirits in many ways, but they separated their teamwork politically. And Rabindranath Tagore wrote a poem. This is his most famous poem, I think, in its English translation at least. And I'd like to end my remarks with this. Where the mind is without fear, and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father. Let my country awake.
Well, a new philosophy of living.com is Jeffrey Wattles' website. If you look below this video, I'll have a link to it. I want to thank Jeffrey for appearing today. Next weekend, I'll be shifting the focus. I'll have 2 shows on Saturday. I'll have 3 experts on the Western film, and the day after that, I'll have 3 experts on television talking about the golden age of television, whether it was the early days now, or as I posit, from about 1960 to 1980. So, Jeffrey, thank you for your time and for spending it talking about your philosophy of life.
And thank you for your wonderful interviewing, Dan. It's been a wonderful experience.